Imagine standing at the edge of a river. The water is clear, the banks are thick with willow trees, birds are singing, beavers are building. Life is everywhere. Now imagine that none of this existed 30 years ago, that this valley was barren, eroded, silent. Nothing changed except one thing: a predator came back. In 1995, scientists released 14 wild wolves into Yellowstone National Park. What happened next rewrote everything we thought we knew about nature, because those wolves didn't only hunt. They triggered a chain of events so profound that rivers, actual rivers, changed their course. Not because of floods, not because of earthquakes, because of fear. This is the story of the gray wolf, the animal that changed the course of rivers. And to understand how a wolf moves a river, we first need to understand what kind of creature we are dealing with. The gray wolf, Canis lupus. Not the biggest predator, not the fastest, but for thousands of years, the most consequential. At its peak, the gray wolf roamed across nearly the entire northern hemisphere, from the frozen tundra of Alaska to the mountains of Central Asia. No land predator, apart from humans, had a wider range on this planet. And then we decided it had to go. Over the 19th and early 20th century, wolves were systematically hunted, poisoned, and trapped across North America. By the 1920s, the gray wolf had been completely wiped out from Yellowstone and most of the continental United States. We thought we were solving a problem. We had no idea we were creating a catastrophe. Because the gray wolf is what scientists call a keystone species. Think of a keystone, that single wedge-shaped stone at the top of an arch. Remove it, and the entire structure collapses. The wolf was that stone. And when we removed it, we didn't just lose a predator, we pulled the keystone out of the arch. But the true scale of that collapse only became visible over the following decades, and what scientists found was far worse than anyone had anticipated. Yellowstone, 1926. The last wolf pack is killed. And at first, everything seems fine. The elk are thriving. The park looks wild, beautiful, untouched. But underneath that surface, something is beginning to unravel. Without wolves, the elk have no reason to be afraid. And an animal with no fear is an animal with no limits. They graze wherever they want, for as long as they want. Imagine an all-you-can-eat restaurant that never closes. That is what Yellowstone became for the elk. They moved into the open valleys. They grazed along the riverbanks. They ate everything within reach: willows, aspens, cottonwoods, the very vegetation that held the land together. Without those plants, the soil had nothing anchoring it. The riverbanks began to erode. The rivers widened and became shallow. Songbirds lost their nesting habitat. Beaver populations collapsed without willows to eat and build with. And without beaver dams, the wetlands they created vanished, taking with them otters, fish, and dozens of species that depended on that habitat. One missing predator, and an entire ecosystem was quietly coming apart at the seams. Because in January 1995, after decades of political resistance, the United States government made a decision that ranchers hated and nature had been waiting 70 years to receive. January 12, 1995. Lamar Valley. Below freezing, snow on the ground. 14 wolves, captured in Alberta, Canada, transported in reinforced crates, are about to be released. The political battle had taken years. Ranchers fought fiercely. The opposition was loud and angry, but the science had won. Barely. The crates were opened. The wolves hesitated at the threshold. They sniffed the cold air, scanned the tree line, and then, one by one, they stepped out onto the snow and disappeared into the forest. Scientists expected a simple outcome: more wolves, fewer elk, less grazing, vegetation returns. A straight line. But that is not what happened. What happened was far more powerful. The elk numbers did eventually decline, but the transformation of Yellowstone did not wait for the population to shrink. It began almost immediately. Because the elk did not need to die in large numbers to change their behavior. They just needed to be afraid again. Within the first seasons, researchers noticed something extraordinary. The elk were abandoning the open valleys, retreating from the riverbanks, avoiding exposed terrain where a wolf could see them and run them down. Scientists called it the ecology of fear. A predator does not need to kill every animal to reshape a population's behavior. The mere possibility of death is enough to change where animals go, what they eat, and how long they stay. And what that fear set in motion was a sequence of events so cascading and so interconnected that scientists are still studying it 30 decades later. Year 1. In the valleys the elk have abandoned, seeds are germinating, willow saplings pushing through the soil, aspen shoots emerging. Not because the climate shifted, because nothing is eating them before they have a chance to grow. This is a trophic cascade, a chain reaction traveling through an entire ecosystem, from the top predator all the way down to the soil itself. By years 3 and 4, songbirds returned in numbers not recorded in decades. Warblers, sparrows, drawn back by the vegetation they needed to nest and feed. Then, the beavers returned, and this is where everything accelerates. Beavers are ecosystem engineers. Their dams slow the water, create deep ponds, raise the water table. Those ponds became home to otters, muskrats, fish, osprey, and eagles. Each species arriving not because anyone introduced them, but because the habitat had been rebuilt by a chain reaction that started with 14 wolves in the snow. But the most astonishing part of this cascade was happening in the rivers themselves. The returning willows and aspen roots were stitching the soil together, binding the loose, eroded sediment that had been crumbling into the water for 70 years. The erosion was slowing, the banks were holding, and the rivers were beginning to change. But exactly how does a wolf physically alter the course of a river? The answer is one of the most elegant pieces of science ever documented. A river is not a fixed thing. It is a living system constantly responding to the forces acting upon it. Change the vegetation on its banks, and you change the river. For 70 years, the riverbanks had been stripped bare. They had collapsed inward. The rivers had widened, slowed, and become unstable. Then the wolves came back. The elk moved away. The vegetation returned. And here is what followed. The roots of the willows penetrated deep into the bank soil, binding millions of particles of earth into a stable mass. The banks stopped collapsing. The river narrowed. A narrower channel forces the same volume of water through a smaller space. The water accelerated, deepened, and a faster, deeper river begins to cut downward rather than spreading sideways, carving a more defined, more permanent path through the valley floor. The meanders reformed. The channels developed structure. The rivers of Yellowstone were, measurably and verifiably, changing their physical course. Geologists call this geomorphological change, the alteration of the physical shape of the land, the kind of change we associate with glaciers or earthquakes. In Yellowstone, it was caused by the behavior of an elk, which was caused by the fear of a wolf. A predator that never touches water, that has no awareness of hydrology or erosion, simply by existing, simply by hunting, simply by making other animals afraid, it reached through the food web, through the behavior of its prey, through the growth of plants, through the physics of water and soil, and moved a river. And if one wolf pack in one national park could trigger a transformation of this magnitude, what does this mean for every ecosystem we are dismantling right now? Yellowstone is not a unique case. It is an example. Remove sharks from the ocean and marine food webs collapse from the middle outward. Remove mountain lions from western forests and the same cascade of degradation unfolds. Remove lions from African savanna and baboon populations surge, spreading disease into human communities. We keep learning this lesson, and we keep forgetting it. Right now, wolves are returning to France, Germany, and the Netherlands on their own. Lynx reintroduction is being debated in Scotland. Iberian wolf populations are being legally protected for the first time. These are not sentimental projects. They are scientific interventions driven by the understanding that without these animals, the landscapes we depend on for clean water, for carbon storage, for soil stability, those landscapes are quietly degrading beneath our feet. The wolf does not know any of this. It hunts because it is hungry. It moves because it must. It howls because that is how it speaks to its family across a dark and frozen valley. But in doing so, it holds a world together. The next time you stand beside a river, listen to it, because somewhere in the shape of those banks, in the roots of those trees, there may be the echo of a predator. And if that echo has gone silent, it is worth asking why. If this video changed how you see nature, leave a like, and tell me in the comments which animal do you think is the keystone species of your region. Subscribe, because next time we'll watch another video that will be even more interesting.